Hello everyone, this is my YouTube channel Truth Media. So in this YouTube channel, we will see about the first chapter of psychology, the first chapter of general psychology. So in this chapter, we will see about what is the definition and the meaning and definition of psychology, the scientific nature of psychology, goal of psychology, what are the major perspectives of psychology, and major subfields in psychology. And at last, we will see some very important points of various research methods in psychology. So for this lecture, I mainly tries to present and discuss my lecture PowerPoint using English mainly as a medium of instruction. Also, I will translate some important points only into the Amharic language. So let's continue. So when it comes to the definition of psychology, so the term psychology or the word psychologist comes from two Greek words, psych and logos. So psych means mind, whereas logos means study or discourse or scientific discourse. So this definition is an epistemological definition of psychology, which means professionals, philosophers of the field define psychology by taking root terms of the discipline. So, epistemologically, psychology can be defined as the study of mind, soul, and spirit. Mind, soul, and spirit. ስለዚህ ይሄኛው ብዙ ጊዜ የቃሉን መሰረታዊያን በመጠቀም የተሰጠ ትርጓሜ ወይም ዴፊኒሽን ነው ማለት ነው። So let me comes to the other definition of psychology. So psychologists, based on their intention, research finding, and background experience, and they define and agreed upon this definition, and they define psychology as a scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. So this definition is a little bit modern and more comprehensive definition of the today's world. ስለዚህ ይሄኛው ዴፊኒሽን በጣም የተሻለው አሁን ቢሆን ሳይኮሎጂ የሚተረጎምበትና ዲፋይን የሚደረግበት መንገድ ነው። ስለዚህ ትርጓሜው ወይም ዴፊኒሽኑ በሙያው ወይም በስነ ልቦና ውስጥ ያሉ በአመለካከታቸው በጥናት ምርምር ውጤታቸው እና በማስተማር ወይም በሪሰርች ልምዳቸውን መሰረት አድርገው የሰጡት የሳይኮሎጂ ዴፊኒሽን ነው። እናም they defined as psychology as a scientific study of human behavior and the underlying mental processes. So in this definition, we have three aspects or terms that we need to define again. So the first term is science. Why we say psychology is a scientific study? Because it follows a scientific procedure and use empirical data to study behavior and mental processes. That's why we call psychology a scientific study. That's why psychology is we call a scientific study. So when it comes to the second terms of the definition, which is a behavior, why we label psychology as a study of human behavior? Because it tries to study all our outwarded or overt action and reactions such as talking, facial expression, movement, etc. These all are outwarded behaviors of humans that can be easily mirrored or observed by other individuals who are around us. Due to that, we take psychology as a study of human and animal behavior. So let me come to the third terms of the definition, which is mental process. So it refers to all the internal covert activities of human mind, such as thinking, feeling, perceiving, intuition, remembering. These all are what? Mental processes. So that psychology can be taken as a study of those mental processes or internal covert mental transactions. So, in a nutshell, or in conclusion, we define psychology as a scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Okay, behavior and mental processes. So, we give a meaning for the term psychology, and then we define based on epistemological definition and a little bit modern definition based on intuition, research finding, and experience. So, what comes next is the goals of psychology. The goals of psychology. What are the goals of learning psychology? So, as a science, psychology has four goals. Four goals. The first one is describing or description, which involves observing behavior and noticing everything about it. So it mainly raises a question like what is happening, where does it happen, to whom it happen, to whom does it happen, and under what circumstance does it seems to happen. So working to answer those basic questions is description. Describe. So let me come to the second goals of psychology. The second goals of psychology, explaining. So in this case, explaining is about trying to find reason for the observed behavior. So it addresses questions why and the cause-effect relationship. The questions why and cause-effect relationship. Basically, explaining as a goals of psychology tries to excavate the possible and logical reason of the psychological phenomena or the event of happening. The event of happening. So when it comes to the third goal of psychology, which is called prediction, in this goal of psychology, we try to determine the future likelihood of the event of occurrence. The event of occurrence. So in this case, we will see the future likelihood of the phenomena, the psychological phenomena, and then we try to predict the future outcomes based on the current behavioral manifestations. And at last, we comes to the fourth goals of psychology entitled controlling. Here, we finally tries to control, modify or change the behavioral manifestation or the behavior from desirable one to what? Undesirable one. Undesirable one. From undesirable behavior to the desirable behavior. The desirable behavior. ስለዚህ በአጠቃላይ ወደ አራት አይነት ጎልስ ኦፍ ሳይኮሎጂ አሉ። የመጀመሪያው ዲስክራይቢንግ ነው። አንደር ዲስክራይቢንግ ዩ ትራይስ ቱ ኖቲስ ሁሉንም የምታዩትን ኦብዘርቭ ያደረጋችሁትን ነገር ሲስተማቲካሊ ሪከርድ ማድረግ፣ መሰብሰብ፣ መያዝ ዊ ኮል ኢት ዲስክራይቢንግ ገለጻ መግለጽ ሲሆን፣ ሁለተኛው ደግሞ ምንድነው? ኤክስፕሌኒንግ ነው። ማብራሪያ መስጠት በዋናነት አሳማኝ የሆነ ምክንያት መፈለግ፣ ምክንያት ዴቨሎፕ ማድረግ we call it explain, which is the second goal of psychology. So the goals of or the most important contribution of explaining as a goal of psychology is helping to develop theory. ስለዚህ explaining in the end goal of psychology theory develop ለማድረግ ያገለግላል ማለት ነው። theory develop ለማድረግ ያገለግላል። ሶስተኛው ጎል ኦፍ ሳይኮሎጂ ፕሪዲክሽን ወይም ትንበያ ሲሆን ስለዚህ የመጀመሪያው ጎል ኦፍ ሳይኮሎጂ ላይ ባህሪውን አየን፣ ተመለከትን፣ ሪከርድ አደረግን። ከዚያ ሁለተኛው የሳይኮሎጂ ጎል ላይ ደግሞ ኤክስፕሌን አደረግን፣ ተነተን፣ ምክንያት አብራራን፣ ምክንያቱን ወሰድን። ከዚያ በኋላ ደግሞ በእነዚያን መሰረት አድርገን ወደፊት ምን ሊከሰት እንደሚችል፣ ምን አይነት ሁነት እንደሚከሰት አሁን ባለው የባህሪ መገለጫ እንተነበያለን ማለት ነው። ላስት የመጨረሻው ኮንትሮሊንግ ሲሆን ዲዩሪንግ ኮንትሮሊንግ ሞዲፋይ የማድረግ የመቀየር፣ የማሻሻል ወይም የማስወገድ የባህሪ መገለጫዎችን፣ ጠቃሚ ያልሆኑ ባህሪዎችን፣ ጠቃሚ ያልሆኑ የባህሪ መገለጫዎችን ማስወገድ ወይም ማሻሻል ወይም መቀየር ሲሆን፣ ለምሳሌ በትምህርት መውደቅን እንደ አንድ ባህሪ ብንወስደው ኮንትሮሊንግ ላይ ወይም መቆጣጠር ላይ ስንሄድ ማሻሻል አንደኛው የጎልስ ኦፍ የኮንትሮሊንግ አክቲቪቲ ነው ማለት ነው። ማሻሻል ውጤቱን ከመጥፎ የውጤት ደረጃ ወደ ተሻለ የውጤት ወይም ወደ ተሻለ ሰክሰስ ወይም ስኬት ማሻሻል፣ መቀየር ወይም እነዚህ ነገሮች መስራት we call it controlling. So let me come to the historical background and major perspectives in psychology. So psychology was detached from its mother field, philosophy, and it began as a science of its own in the year 1879 in Leipzig University laboratory by the well-known physician or medical doctor named Wilhelm Wundt. In German, you cannot pronounce W as it is, rather you must pronounce W as V. That's why I read as Wilhelm Wundt. For anyhow, psychology as a science has 143 years of anniversary as an academic discipline till today. Okay, till today. So let me proceed to the other parts of the historical background. So the founding father of the modern psychology is Wilhelm Wundt. And psychology as a discipline went through successive development with different school of thought which has emerged at different time. So this school of thought can be described as into two broad categories. The first one is the old school of thought and the second one is the modern school of thought. So let me see the early school of thought of psychology. Okay, the early school of thought of psychology. So first, let me define the term school of thought. So school of thought is a system of thinking about certain psychological phenomena like human behavior and mind. So one may think that human behavior is the result of inheritance, which is a biological perspective, or you may say human behavior is the result of the interaction with the environment, what you call known as environmental ecological approach. Unfortunately, this approach may not be included under the early school of thought of psychology for today's lecture point of discussion. So in this case, let me see the first early school of thought entitled Structuralism. So structuralist theorists tries to view psychology as a study of the structures of human mind. So they worry about as psychology should study the structure of human mind. So one of the founder of the structuralism school of thought is Edward Titchener, who is a disciple or a student of Wilhelm Wundt at Leipzig University of Germany. So as a theoretical propagation, the main goal of structuralists were to find out the unit or the elements which make up the mind, such as sensation and feeling. ስለዚህ በዋናነት ሳይኮሎጂ እንደ አንድ የትምህርት ዘርፍ ራሱን ችሎ እንዲቆም ያደረገው እና የመጀመሪያው ሳይኮሎጂ በሚለው ስሙ እንዲጠራ ያደረገው ሰው ጀርመናዊ ሐኪም ቪልሄልም ቡንት የሚባል የሊፕሲንግ ዩኒቨርሲቲ የሕክምና ሳይንስ ምሩቅ እና ተመራማሪ ሲሆን ሳይኮሎጂ እንደ አንድ የትምህርት አይነት የተጀመረው በ1879 ሊፕሲንግ በምትባል የጀርመን ከተማ ሊፕዚንግ በሚባል ዩኒቨርሲቲ የላቦራቶሪ ውስጥ ነው ማለት ነው። በዋናነት ሳይኮሎጂ እንደ አንድ ትምህርት ሲጀመር ቪልሄልም ቡንት የፈጠረውና እንደ አንድ ሳይንስ እንዲቆም ያደረገው ሰው ስለሆነ የቪልሄልም ቡንት የሳይኮሎጂ አባት በመባል ይታወቃል። the father of psychology or the father of modern psychology በመባል ይታወቃል። እስካሁን ያለውንም የሳይኮሎጂ እንደ አንድ ዲሲፕሊን ያለውን ቆይታ ስናይ ወደ 143 ዓመት ያክል በትምህርት ስርዓት ውስጥ ቆይቷል እስከዚህ ዓመት ድረስ። በአንጻሩ ሲታይ ሪሌቲቭሊ ያንግ የሚባል የትምህርት አይነት ነው ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ሳይኮሎጂ እንደ አንድ የትምህርት ዘርፍ በተለያዩ ሂደቶች ውስጥ ያለፈ በተለያዩ የትምህርት እሳቤዎች ውስጥ ያለፈ ሲሆን እነዚህ እሳቤዎችም በሁለት ይታያሉ። አንደኛው የጥንቱ እሳቤ ወይም ስኩል ኦፍ ቶት ኤርሊ ስኩል ኦፍ ቶት ሲሆን ሌላኛው ደግሞ ዘመናዊው እሳቤ ወይም ሞደርን ስኩል ኦፍ ቶት የሚባለው ነው። ስለዚህ የመጀመሪያው ኤርሊ ስኩል ኦፍ ቶት ወይም የጥንቱ እሳቤ ውስጥ የሚገኘው ስትራክቸራሊዝም ይባላል። ሶ ስትራክቸራሊዝም as a school of thought was founded by Edward Titchener, and the goal of this school of thought is to find out the unit or the elements which make up the mind, such as sensation and feeling. So they also use called introspection as a tool. So let me come to the second school of thought, functionalism. So functionalism as a theoretical perspective tries to view psychology as a study of function of the mind. So it raises a basic question like how human mind helps human to survive and adapt the real or cosmic world. So the founder of this school of thought or functionalism is William James, who is an American psychologist, taught in Germany, and established psychological laboratory at Michigan State University of United States of America, and later published the first modern textbook for psychology as a contribution entitled Principle of Psychology. So functionalists tries to raise a basic question: what is the function of human mind and how human mind helps human to function and adapt the real or cosmic world. However, the structuralists tries to raise a question: what are the elements or the building blocks of human mind? The main basic question raised by structuralist theorists. Let me come to the tools or the research methods of functionalism. So unlike Wundt or Titchener, William James focused on how the mind allows people to function in a real world and adapt to their surroundings. So they worry functionalists as a theoretical perspective. They follow this theoretical perspective and tries to answer the questions related to the function of human mind. And they also developed a research method including questionnaire, mental test, objective description of behavior. So they were very lucky enough. Even today we use those research methods and the tools as it is. Okay, as it is. So the third school of psychology, old school of thought of psychology entitled Gestalt psychology. So this school of thought psychology views psychology as a study of the whole human mind. And the term Gestalt was taken from the German term which means form, whole, or configuration. So the now individual who started Gestalt theoretical perspective named Max Wertheimer, a German psychologist named Max Wertheimer. So Max Wertheimer established Gestalt, a school of thought under the umbrella of old school of psychology. And Gestalt psychologists tries to view and frame psychology as a study of the whole human mind. They have also a well-known proverb, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Its parts. So according to them, mind is the result of the whole patterns of sensory activity and the relationship and organization within their patterns. Within their patterns. So Gestalt psychologists acknowledge consciousness. They held that whole is greater than the sum of its parts, what I said a minute before, and it is different from it to the mind is greater than its parts. Parts like image, sensation, and feeling. Sensation and feeling. So let me come to the basic discussion question here. Based on their theoretical approach, how would functionalism and Gestalt theorists try to view this piece of an art on the next slide. Okay, here you can find the art. So this mosaic art is made up of the beer and soft drink capsules. You can find here a black capsules, yellow capsules, and white capsules. So the developer of this mosaic basically built this beautiful art depiction. So applying the prior theoretical school of thought or theoretical foundations, how it tries to associate the theoretical perspective with this artist of mosaic. So if you take the structuralism school of thought, they tries to find out the individual capsule. They don't worry about the coordination, color, and beauty of this mosaic depiction. Rather, they worry to find out the individual capsule because remember, structuralist theorists tries to propagate what makes human mind and to find out the building blocks of human mind. When it comes to the functionalism structural functionalism school of thought, they tries to view psychology as a study of the function of the mind. If you present this mosaic art at their subject of interest, they try to find out the purpose of depicting this mosaic art. They don't worry about the building block or the elements that make up the mosaic, or they don't worry about the configuration, the pattern and depiction of this mosaic art as well. So perhaps there is a question like, what is the purpose of depicting this mosaic art? Okay, what the importance of having this mosaic art? When it comes to the Gestalt school of psychology, they try to view the whole pattern, configuration, and interrelationship of the elements, interrelationship of the whole mosaic depiction. So they try to view this mosaic picture as a whole. So let me come to the fourth old school of psychology entitled behaviorism. So behavioral school of thought studies observable and measurable behaviors only. So the founder of this school of thought is named John Watson. So according to Watson, we cannot study, define, locate, or measure consciousness. Therefore, it cannot be the object of scientific study. This implies that behavioral school of psychology propagated that psychology must study observable and measurable human behavior only because due to the fact that we cannot locate or objectively measure human consciousness human consciousness human consciousness human consciousness. So Watson believed that all behaviors are learned but not inherited. So we learn our behaviors from the surrounding environment, from the social world that we immerse in. So learners are passive and reactive. They cannot initiate their learning, but they respond when the environment stimulates them. So they make themselves known in dreams, slip of tongue, and apparent accidents, even jokes. Okay, so according to behavioral school of thought, our behaviors are learned from the environment, the environment. So we cannot study consciousness because you cannot locate, measure, or observe human consciousness. Rather, as a subject of interest of psychology, they believe that psychology must study the observable and measurable human behavior only. This is the notion or the idea of behavioral school of thought. Behavioral school of thought. So these all four school of thoughts are mainly discussing on human mind and behavior as a conscious experience. Functionalism, structuralism, Gestalt, and behavioral school of thought tries to study human behavior and mind as a conscious experience. But in opposite to this idea comes from the Vienna physician named Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud. So his theoretical perspective entitled psychoanalysis. So according to Freud, psychology study about the components of unconscious part of human mind. Unconscious part of human mind. So Freud became convinced to some of the physical illness of his patients don't have medical or bodily cases, but non-physical or emotional causes called hysteria or conversion reaction. So Freud was uh, a medical doctor at Vienna University Hospital who specialized in neurology. So while he was practicing medicine as his specialty profession, he prescribed drugs, but most of his patients failed to get healed from their diseases. But gradually, Mr. Freud discovered that the reason why his patients failed to recover from their illness is that because of their uh, non-physical or emotional causes of their problem. So he named this problem is hysteria or conversion reaction. Uh, for anyhow, for anyhow, for anyhow, he underscored the conflict and emotional traumas that has occurred in early childhood can be too threatening to be remembered consciously, and therefore they become hidden or unconscious, and then will remain what? Remain to affect their latter life. So this is the limitation of psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis, as the oldest school of thought of psychology, give little attention to childhood experiences. Childhood experiences. Childhood experiences that are too threatening to remember consciously. Therefore, they become hidden and unconscious then will remain to affect their later life. This is the limitation of the psychoanalysis as an old school of thought of psychology. An old school of thought of psychology. So let me come to the other important points about the unconscious part of human mind, which is the subject matter of psychoanalysis that contains hidden wishes, passions, guilty secret, unspeakable yearning, and conflict between desire and duty. So they make themselves known in dream, slip of the tongue, apparent accident, and even joke. So they are totally what? Unconscious. So those experiences are the most important elements that must be excavated and studied using psychoanalysis perspective as, as a main area of emphasis of psychology. So to sum up, according to psychoanalysis perspective, psychology should study those unconscious human mind and its elements like that of hidden wish, passion, guilty secret, unspeakable yearning, conflict between desire and duty. Let me come to the modern school of psychology. So it is true that the early school of thought of psychology, such as structuralism, functionalism, Gestalt, behavioral, and psychoanalysis school of thought contribute and laid a foundation for further evolvement and development in of psychology as a science. So this means that they open a door for taking multiple perspectives in explaining human behavior and mental process as a main variable of study in psychology. So let me come to the modern perspective, which includes psychodynamic, behavioral, again humanistic, cognitive, biological, and socio-cultural perspective. So those modern school of thought of psychology raise different questions about human behavior, put different assertions about how the mind works, and different kind of explanation why people do what they do. So this is a basic questions probably raised and answered through the discussion on those modern theoretical school of thought of psychology. Well, let me proceed to the first modern school of thought of psychology named psychodynamic perspective. So it takes its origin from Freud theory of psychoanalysis and it tries to emphasize on the unconscious dynamic within the individual, such as inner forces, conflicts, and instinctual energies. Okay, instinctual inner forces, conflicts, and instinctual energies are the components of human unconscious dynamic. So psychodynamic as an approach tries to emphasize on the influence of unconscious mental behavior on everyday human behavior. How those unconscious mental behaviors like that of hidden wishes, inner forces, conflicts, and instinctual energies can influence our everyday behavior. The second important point is the role of childhood experience in shaping adult personality. How childhood experiences play a role in shaping personality. Adult personality. Let me raise you one important question. We have two individuals here, Mr. X and B. As a matter of fact, Mr. A raised in economically middle class families. So he has got cuddling, love, caring of his biological parents and relatives as well. So he grown up in this family who support his life in every walk of his life. But Mr. B, the other individual, lost his biological parents at the 6 months of his life. He grown up in orphanage. He get the necessary life provisions like food, clothes, or house, but he failed to get cuddling, love, and protection of his biological parents. So this childhood experience as a phenomena makes to develop or shape those two individuals' personality differently. That's why we call the role of childhood experiences a precursor in shaping adult personality. The other important point is the role of intrapersonal conflict in determining human behavior. The interpersonal conflicts. We have a layer of human, the layer of human personality structure. So what are those personality structures? We have it, which is childish by nature, mainly operate using pleasure principle. So we have also ego, which is the second layer of personality, which tries to act based on the reality principle by considering the surrounding world he or she lives. We have also the third structure of personality entitled superego, which is mainly aspires to bring something in the spiritual world and neglected the materialistic experience and lives of it as a layer of personality. So the intense conflict between when ego becomes immature and fails to mediate, the intense conflict between it and superego, there will be intrapersonal conflict that affect human behavior and personality. So, for anyhow, the influence of unconscious mental behavior on everyday human behavior, the role of child experience in shaping adult personality, and the role of intrapersonal conflict in determining human behavior is the main emphasis of psychodynamic perspective as part of the modern school of thought of psychology. So psychodynamic perspective tries to dig below the surface of the person's behavior to get into the unconscious motives. The unconscious motives. So psychodynamicists think themselves as anarchologists of mind because they try to excavate the unconscious memories records of humans. Due to that, the psychodynamist theorists think themselves as anarchologists of mind. So this is all about the first theoretical perspective entitled psychodynamic perspective. Let me proceed to the second behavior and the second perspective of psychology entitled behavioral perspective. So, of course, there is no clear demarked difference between behavioral school of thought of the old school of psychology and behavioral perspective of the modern school of psychology. Both behavioral school of thought of modern and old school of thought emphasize on the role of learned experience that play a great role in shaping the behavior of an organism. Okay, so both theories tries to concern with how the environment affect the person's actions. But the main difference between the old behavioral perspective and the modern behavioral perspective is that the modern school of thought of psychology, which is the behavioral perspective, mainly tries to study the role of environmental conditions like that of reward and punishment in maintaining or discouraging specific human behavior. This is their basic difference based on the information that you get from your general psychology module. Behavioral perspective is sometimes called black box perspective because behavioral theorists tries to only study the observable and measurable human behavior only. They also believed that human behavior is the result of the interaction between the human and the environment. So behavior is learned from the environment. However, they fail to study the human mind. So mental processes and human mental related activities remain what? Black. Okay, remain what? Untouched. A black box. Remain as a black box. They left to study a human mind which is a black box. That's why they only interested in the effect of the environment, taking it as an input on behavior which is an output, but not in the process inside the black box, which is what? A mental process. That's why behavioral perspective is sometimes called the black box, because they fail to study mental process. So let me comes to the behavioral perspective. So in behavioral perspective, we find two individuals who contribute a lot for the developments of behavioral perspective as a modern theoretical perspective of psychology, named Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. Both of them are the American psychologists, were the American psychologists. So according to this perspective, human behavior is not determined either by unconscious dynamics or the environment. Rather, it emphasizes on the uniqueness of human being, human value, and subjective experience. So the main focus of humanistic perspective is to frame psychology as a study of human uniqueness, value, and subjective experience. And they also believed that this perspective gives a great importance on the individual free will. So the goal of humanistic psychology was helping people to express themselves creatively and achieve their full potential, or self-actualization. Self-actualization. This is the basic notion of psychology. So humanistic perspective sometimes uh, labeled as an individual psychology. As an individual psychology, they worry to study the individual uniqueness, value, subjective well-being, and free will. So having these things in mind, they also believe that they also tries to help people to use their inner potential at most. Their inner potential at most. Let me come to the fourth modern school of thought of psychology, entitled cognitive perspective. So this theoretical perspective tries to emphasize by raising questions like what goes in people's mind, how people reason, remember, understand language, solve problems, explain experiences, and form beliefs. And it shows how people thought and explanations affect their action, feeling, and choice. 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 Cognitive perspective also tries to create a clear analogy between human mind and artificial computer metaphor, and they adopt the information processing model. In conclusion, cognitive perspective tries to frame psychology as a study of those cognitive processes or activities. Let me come to the fifth modern school of thought, entitled biological perspective. So it mainly focuses on studying how function of the body affect behavior, feeling, and thought. So it holds that brain and the various brain chemicals affect physiological processes such as learning, performance, perception of reality, and experience of emotion. So we have certain functions in our body, specifically the nervous system and the endocrine system. So the nervous system basically produce hormones, which is a biological chemical that can activate our feeling, behavior and thought. So this function of the body, affects our behavior, thought, and feeling, feeling, feeling. So it holds that brain and various brain chemicals affect psychological processes such as learning, performance, perception of reality, and experience of emotion. For example, we have a neurotransmitter, serotonin. So the abundance of serotonin and the less availability of serotonin can equally affect what? Learning performance, perception of reality, and experience of emotion. So serotonin is the neurotransmitter, which is the function of the body, but it affects what? Psychological processes like that of performance, perception of reality, and experience of emotion. Well, let me proceed to the other important perspective, which is the last but not the least, the theoretical perspective under modern school of thought of psychology, which is a socio-cultural perspective. So this perspective tries to study how social and cultural factors affect human behavior. For instance, for instance, for instance, for instance, the certain cultural experiences. If you go to in Bulgaria, you can find one great yearly celebration named Bridegroom's Market Day. At the end of the market day, Bulgarian fathers and mothers tries to prepare and beautify their growing beautiful daughter to sell on the market by the following day. So on the bridegroom's market day, the Bulgarian father and mother took their beautiful daughter and sold for European dollars, euro or pound, American dollars, euro or pound. So for Bulgarians, the expensive sale of daughters on the market is a pride. So you cannot blame Bulgarian fathers' behavior, thought and thinking as what? Undesirable. Because what matters most? Their culture. So it implies that the Bulgarian thought, behavior and thinking mainly affected by their culture. Similarly, if you go to in Ethiopia, you cannot sell your daughter on the market because we mainly influenced by our cultural values, norms, which dictates about how we treat, perceive, and think about our growing daughters. So this is basically the difference between those two cultures. So social cultural perspective mainly tries to study the social and cultural factors, the influence of social and cultural factors on the human behavior, on human behavior. So how group membership affect attitude, behavior, why authority and other people like spouse, lovers, friends, bosses, and parents affect each of us. How the presence of those aforementioned people affect our thought, thought and behavior. So let me come to the subfields of psychology. The subfields of psychologies are branches or specializations of psychology So in most cases, those fields or specialization of psychology mainly given to train the masters and PhD psychology students only. So when it comes to the first branches or subfields of psychology, which is called developmental psychology. So developmental psychology as a subfield of psychology tries to study the physical, cognitive, psychological changes of human across the lifespan. Means from the moment of conception to days. So when we say lifespan, it is the span of life from the moment of conception to the days, 2 days. So it attempts to examine major developmental milestones that occur at different stages of human development. So we have certain age-specific achievements of human, for example, language, uttering two couple of words like that of Papa and Mama can be taken as a developmental milestone which is expected around 1 years old. Around 1 year old. So this is a developmental milestone. Plus, developmental psychologists tries to study certain psychological variables like that of identity, parenting style, parenting style, parenting style, parenting style. We have a number of parenting style based on their typology. So these all issues are mainly studied by developmental psychologists. Developmental psychologists. Let me come to the second specialization of psychology, what we call known as personality psychology. So this subfields of psychology mainly tries to study the relatively enduring traits and characteristics of individuals. So personality psychologists study a topic like self-concept, esteem, self-image, sometimes aggression and moral development as well. These are the research topics of personality psychology. So personality psychologists study a relatively unique and enduring traits of characters of individuals. Social psychology, which deals with people's social interaction, relationship, and social perception and attitudes. So it studies how the presence of other people affect our thinking, thought, and behavior. Cross-cultural psychology. So as a field of psychology, it examines the role of culture in understanding human behavior, thought, and emotions. So it compares the nature of psychological processes in different culture. In different culture. The fifth subspecialty of psychology is industrial psychology. So it applies psychological principles in industries, organizations to increase the productivity of the organization. In organizations, sometimes the productivity of employees may fail. So psychologists tries to apply psychological knowledge related to motivation and they improve the motivation level of students and in turn they improve the productivity of the organizations. So in this case we mean that psychologists use a psychological theories and applications of motivation to improve productivity and motivation of employees in institutions, in business institutions, in public institutions. That's why we call it industrial psychology. Forensic psychology, so it applies psychological principles to improve the legal system, police, and eyewitness testimony. So we have certain psychological knowledge, theoretical applications. So those theoretical knowledge, concept, and applications of psychology can be applied in the courtroom experience, like in an eyewitness testimony, criminal detection, behavior of guilt, behavior of innocent. So these all are the applications related to the forensic psychology as a subspecialty of psychology. Let me come to educational psychology. So in educational psychology, it's all about applying psychological principles and theories in educational institutions and processes like that of curriculum construction, teaching and learning process, administration and academic program syllabus development. This is the main areas of educational psychology as a subspecialty. Let me come to the eighth subfields of psychology entitled Health Psychology, which tries to study and apply psychological principles to prevent and treat physical illnesses and diseases of human. So we have certain knowledge, so those psychological knowledge can be applied to treat what? Physical illness of human. Clinical psychology. So mainly clinical psychology designed to apply psychological theories, principles, and therapeutic technique to prevent diagnosis, and treatments of more severe psychological problems or psychological disorders. And the tenth one is the counseling psychology, which is the another subfield of psychology, which is designed to help individuals with less severe psychological problems than what? Clinical psychology. So the basic difference between clinical psychology and counseling psychology is that clinical psychology tries to treat more severe psychological problems like psychological disorders, especially personality disorders, while counseling psychology mainly tries to treat individuals with less severe psychological problems with counselor-client relationship. So let me come to the last part of today's lecture entitled Research Method in Psychology. By the way, when we say research method in psychology, this research method and scientific foundations of the research method can be also applied to the health stream students, because there is a very little difference between research method in psychology and research method in health science. So for that matter, let me see some important highlights of research method. So we have certain terms that we need to define. So the first term that we need to define is scientific method. So it is a process of testing idea through systematic observation, experimentation, and statistical analysis. When we say idea in scientific method or in research, the idea must be testable, researchable idea. Okay, through scientific observation, experimentation, and statistical analysis. The second term that we're going to define is theory, which is an integrated set of principles about observed facts, which intended to describe and explain some aspects of their experience. So, theory is a governing principles or perspectives in research or other aspect of life. The third term that we need to define is hypothesis, which is a tentative or temporary prepositions about the relationship between two or more individuals or phenomena, two or more variables or phenomena. Example: male have high self-confidence in making decisions than female. So this is a hypothesis. So we develop a questionnaire or instrument, and then we select sample. Finally, we administer, and as such we administer questionnaire, and then get back, and then the data feed into the computer system, and at last we analyze the collected data using statistical tools, and the finding support that male have high self-confidence in making decisions than female. So in this case, our hypothesis is what? Supported by the research finding. So it proved males have high self-confidence in decision making than female. In other way around, if the data support as female have high self-confidence than male individual, our hypothesis must be what? Rejected. Rejected. Anyways, hypothesis is a researcher's tentative preposition, tentative or temporary estimation about the research outcome. And then the research outcome must be proved at the end of the research data analysis. Let me come to the types of research method. We have a descriptive research method. In this research method, the researcher simply records what she or he has systematically observed without changing the nature of the data. The observed and recorded data must be systematically reported. So in descriptive research, we have certain specific methods like that of naturalistic observation, case study, and survey. Case study and survey. So under descriptive research method or research, so we need to follow those methods under descriptive research like naturalistic observation, case study, and survey. So here under descriptive research, the main goal of the research method is to systematically record and report the research finding using naturalistic observation, case study, and survey. Good. So let me come to the second research method. So you can see the detail of naturalistic observation, the limitation of naturalistic observation, case study, and also survey from my YouTube slide presentation. So let me proceed with you the second research design entitled colorational research design. So the reason why the researcher developed colorational research design is that because descriptive research design fails to study the relationship between or among variables. So due to that, using descriptive research design, we cannot study the relationship between variables. We cannot estimate the strengths of relationship of variables. We cannot see the directions of variables relationship. So due to these factors, the researcher developed colorational research design. So this research method mainly tries to measure the relationship between two or more variables. So variables is anything that can be changed or vary based on score, room temperature, or gender. Okay. So example, the researcher may cautious to know whether or not cigarette smoking is connected to life expectancy. So it is what? A relationship. So coloration can tell the researchers if there is a relationship between variables, yes, between x and y, or not. How strong the relationship is it strong? So do we have a strong relationship, weak relationship? Here we have also seen the direction of the relationship, what kind of relationship between variables, positive relationship, negative relationship. So these all are the main notions of colorational research design. Colorational research design. Let me see the last research design entitled experimental research. So the reason why we use experimental research because colorational research plus descriptive research fail to study cause-effect relationship. Cause-effect relationship. So in this case, experimental research is designed to allow researchers to study the cause-effect relationship between variables. So in experimental research, one or more variables believed to be influence the behavior being studied. Being studied are manipulated and all other factors are held what? Constant. So to clearly study, let's see the illustrative exam. The researcher may need to know whether or not the class size has an effect on students' academic performance. and hypothesize as do students in a small class size have better academic performance than students in larger class size. In this case, we have two groups and we have also two variables. We have two groups. We have an experimental group and group. We have also the dependent variable and an independent variable. Under this illustrative example, the experimental group is small class size, while the control group is larger class size. When it comes to variables, academic performance is a dependent variable that we're going to measure as a research outcome, and class size is what? The independent variable. Well, this is all about. Please also try to read in detail about steps in scientific research, like that of defining the problem, formulating the hypothesis, and testing the hypothesis, drawing conclusion, and reporting results. But slow down the speed of this PowerPoint presentation in my YouTube channel. This is all about today. በአጠቃላይ ይህን ይመስላል። ስለዚህ በዋናነት የፓወርፖይንቱን ፍጥነት እየቀነሳችሁ በዝርዝር ማንበብ ትችላላችሁ። ከዚህ በዘለለ ግን ሌሎች ተጨማሪ ቻፕተሩን እየጨረሱ እያስተማርኩ በመሄድበት ቁጥር በዚሁ በዩቲዩብ ቻናል ቻፕተሮቹን እየከፋፈልኩ የሚጭን በመሆኑ ተጨማሪ ቻፕተሮችን እንድታውቁ መጫኑን እንድታውቁ ፓወርፖይንቱን እንድታገኙ ላይክ፣ ሼር፣ ሰብስክራይብ ማድረጋችሁን እንዳትረሱ። ምናልባት on the second chapter we will see sensation and perception። ስለዚህ ይህንን በአጠቃላይ በዝርዝር ለማንበብ መሞከር አለባችሁ ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ለዛሬ ያለን ነገር ይህን ይመስላል። በቀጣይ ቪዲዮ ደግሞ ቻፕተር 2 ሴንሴሽን እና ፐርሰፕሽንን ይዤ እመጣለሁ ማለት ነው። አመሰግናለሁ።